How do you tell whether criticism of a historian or other humanities scholar is either legitimate or just hater shit? This is important because usually the most interesting, powerful truth tellers of any given generation face the most criticism, because academia is inherently a white supremacist colonial institution funded by extractive capitalism and deeply invested in maintaining an extremely violent imperial status quo. And therefore, anyone who comes along lobbing a truth bomb that threatens the power of elites and threatens the status quo is going to face a lot of backlash. For example, yesterday I mentioned how much I've adored The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by David Graeber and David Wengrow. And David Graeber is one of these lightning rod scholars. But I was quickly informed that there's a lot of criticism of this book online. And I went to look at that criticism and spent a good amount of time yesterday looking at it and found it to be mostly hater shit. And this hater shit is really familiar to me because, again, I read and interact with scholars who often in their time face a lot of that hater shit. Scholars like Shlomo Sand and Norman Finkelstein were discredited and smeared and, almost run out of academia because of backlash to their anti-Zionist Jewish perspective and scholarship. And only now, after 2 years of bald-faced genocide, are a new generation of readers and scholars taking a closer look at their work. In The Dawn of Everything, the Davids, Graeber, and Wengrow are basically saying that, generations of archaeologists and anthropologists have both gotten history incredibly wrong because of racial biases they inherited from Victorian era thinkers. And that's embarrassing for a lot of people's careers and reputations. And I think that embarrassment and defensiveness and professional jealousy is behind much of the criticism of this book that I was reading. So here's how I tell the difference between legit criticism and hater shit. I find criticism of a nonfiction book really compelling when the critic is able to point out that they got facts wrong, or the author's logic is bad, the conclusions they're making don't follow from the evidence they present, or the author's telling a lie of omission. They've left out some evidence that is so big and so transformational to the picture of what they're trying to show that it's really a misleading distortion. But all three of these things have to be either fundamental to the central thesis of the book or in a pattern. Look, any scholar is going to make minute mistakes. It doesn't matter. Teams of scholars work on these books. Teams of editors and proofreaders and fact checkers, go over them with a fine-tooth comb, but there's always going to be a mistake or two. So just because there's one fact wrong doesn't mean that you throw out the whole book. But if the facts, the evidence they're showing you is wrong in a way that changes the central theses, the main points of the book, then that's a very legitimate criticism. With logic, maybe one or two of the author's conclusions. I mean, an author in a book like this that's 700 pages long, the authors are putting forth thousands of ideas. Maybe in some of them, a couple of them, you can show, I don't really think their conclusion follows from this evidence. But if there's not a pattern of that, or if that isn't true of the fundamental theses of the book, then that's not a reason to dismiss an entire work of scholarship. And same with lies of omission. No book is going to be able to consider every single piece of evidence on any given subject. Books by nature have to choose a chunk of things to look at and talk about. And so just because, you've said, they're talking about this topic and they didn't mention this one piece of evidence, that doesn't equal a lie of omission. However, for example, if there were a book about the history of Israel that did not mention the Nakba and the displacement of 750,000 Palestinians at gunpoint by Israeli paramilitary groups, that would be a lie of omission. That's a major distortion of history, and it's an intentional distortion as well. Not that a lie of omission has to be intentional, but when it comes to right-wing propaganda, it often is. If a critic can show that all of these are, serious fundamental problems with a book, I'm going to take that really seriously. And when it comes to these three books, these are some of the most criticized books I've ever talked about, but I don't find the criticisms of them legitimate. I find them to be mostly hater shit. So let's talk about what that is. Any ad hominem attack where the critic is attacking like the character or other works by the author rather than the work in question is hater shit. I saw a very long criticism by a guy who seemed to be motivated primarily in this criticism by the fact that he was ticked off about shit David Graeber had said at Occupy Wall Street back in 2011, which has nothing to do with whether or not the scholarship in this book is accurate. A lot of Zionist reviewers have criticized genocide bad by saying the author is just a TikToker. I am on TikTok. That doesn't disprove any of the history or ideas that I'm talking about in this book. Another main tactic of hater shit is fighting straw men. So a straw man, right, is when you create an enemy that doesn't actually exist. For example, the majority of the scathing criticism around this book, The Invention of Jewish People, which I've had so many people tell me makes Shlomo Sand a hack, is based on something the author actually didn't say in like 3 paragraphs of this 300-page book. And in those 3 paragraphs, Sand floats the idea, says maybe Ashkenazi Jews are descended from the Khazar Jewish kingdom. People have turned this into such a straw man. They're acting like Sand is claiming that Ashkenazi Jews definitely 100% all come from the Khazars, have no Levantine DNA, are 100% Khazar derived. None of which are things he just floats this as a possibility in a few paragraphs of a 300-page book. And for this whole book is, often called a hack. I've been told even by Jewish anti-Zionist leftists that I'm, promoting anti-Semitism by even mentioning it. But if you actually fucking read the book, it's like he's not saying it. He just literally said maybe, guys. He presented you with some evidence and said maybe. It's a straw man. In criticisms of this book, I see a lot of responding to straw mans, and I'm not sure whether those straw mans are coming from genuine misunderstandings, because this book is dense and people's reading comprehension sometimes suffers. And like some of these straw man arguments, I'm like, what book did you read that you got this from? Like, how are you not nuanced enough to like get that that's not what he was saying? Or it could be bad faith readings. Like I said, this book is really threatening to a lot of people's like careers and worldviews and ideologies. And like people read books in bad faith. People read books like, fuck you, David Graeber. You think you're so cool? You think you're the most popular anarchist? I'll show you. Like, that's how they're reading the book. And so they're reading everything in bad faith and, like, taking things literally that are clearly not to be meant to be taken literally, ignoring nuance, focusing in on, like, a few little semantics that they can pick fights with. All of that is hater shit. A big red flag that you're reading hater shit is also any criticism that says the book is too political, or pick up certain specific politics, too Marxist, too anarchist. Everything is political. Leftist politics in scholarship stand out to us so much because they're challenging a status quo rather than reinforcing it, like most academic scholarship, which is mostly pretty conservative. Again, a work of scholarship should be discredited if like the facts are wrong and the logic is bad, not because it's too political or the politics make you feel threatened. It's like, is it true or not? You know what I mean? Then there's the tactic of clear cutting the forest for the bark. You're familiar for missing the forest for the trees? Well, clear cutting the forest for the bark is what I mean by like, what I was saying, like finding one little fact that's wrong. Of course, any book that's 700 pages long is going to get maybe one little shard of pottery was misstated or something. And then, just throwing out the whole book, oh, this whole thing is garbage because I could find one little mistake. That's called a correction. And by all means, put that correction out there publicly. Maybe the publisher will include it in a future edition, but that's not a central critique of the work. And the final tactic of hater shit is just when this isn't the book I wanted. I thought this book was going to be something else and it's not. Another critique I see of my book is that it's too autobiographical. I'm sorry, the first 3 words of the back matter are part activist memoir. The book is what it is. I'm sorry it's not the book you wanted me to write. Please, you go write the book you wanted to exist. A lot of people had a lot of projections for what they wanted this book to be and how they wanted it to affirm their politics and worldview. And when it didn't do that, they got mad and spewed a bunch of hater shit on the internet. And frankly, it's embarrassing. When I see this, I cringe and I'm so embarrassed for the critic because it's so obvious they're speaking from a place of total ego meltdown.